What would you do if the leader of the most racist organization in America called you, live on national radio to spew hatred and threats? Would you hang up, fight back with anger? Or would you find a way to reach the humanity buried deep beneath decades of indoctrinated hate? Bob Marley faced exactly this situation in 1978, and his response would not only transform his attacker, but create the most powerful moment of live radio ever broadcast, proving that love really can conquer even the deepest hatred. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shaped the legends we know today. November 15th, 1978, WQED Radio, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Bob Marley was in the middle of his most successful American tour, and radio stations across the country were eager to interview the Jamaican musician who had captured the world's attention with his messages of unity, love, and social justice. DJ Marcus Johnson was hosting his evening talk show, Night Voices, a popular call-in program that combined music with social commentary. Bob had agreed to a live 30-minute interview to discuss his new album, Kaya, and his upcoming concert in Pittsburgh. The interview had been going smoothly, with Bob discussing his music, his Rastafarian faith, and his hopes for racial harmony in America. Marcus was an experienced interviewer who appreciated Bob's thoughtful responses and spiritual wisdom. "Bob," Marcus said about 20 minutes into the interview, "you've talked about music being a universal language that can bring people together. But there are still people in America who don't want to hear that message. What would you say to someone who actively opposes the kind of unity you're promoting?" Bob considered the question carefully. "Well, Marcus, I believe that hatred is learned, just like love is learned. If someone can learn to hate, they can also learn to love. It just takes patience and understanding." "Let's see if we have any callers who want to respond to that," Marcus said, opening the phone lines. "We have John from Alabama on line 1. John, you're on the air with Bob Marley." The voice that came through the radio speakers was harsh, angry, and filled with venom. "This is Grand Wizard John Patterson of the Alabama Knights of the Ku Klux Klan," the caller announced, his southern accent thick with hatred. "And I'm calling to tell Bob Marley and all his Negro-loving supporters that we don't want his kind of so-called unity in our country." Marcus immediately reached for the button to cut off the call, but Bob gestured for him to wait. Something in Bob's expression told Marcus that this was exactly the kind of moment Bob had been talking about, an opportunity to respond to hatred with love. "Mr. Patterson," Bob said calmly, his voice showing no anger or fear, "thank you for calling. Can you tell me why you hate people you've never met?" Patterson was clearly surprised that Bob hadn't hung up or started arguing. "I don't hate nobody," he said defensively. "I just believe in keeping the races separate, like God intended. Your music promotes race mixing and destroys the natural order." "The natural order," Bob repeated thoughtfully. "Can you tell me where in nature you see racial separation? Do the birds refuse to fly together because of their colors? Do the flowers in a garden segregate themselves?" Patterson was quiet for a moment, clearly not expecting this kind of philosophical response. That's different. Animals don't have souls like humans do." "So you believe humans have souls?" Bob asked. "Of course I do. I'm a Christian man." "Then tell me, Mr. Patterson, what color is a soul?" The question hung in the air over the radio waves. Thousands of listeners across Pennsylvania and neighboring states were glued to their radios, listening to this unprecedented exchange between a reggae musician and a KKK leader. Souls don't have color," Patterson admitted reluctantly. "Then why do you judge people by the color of their skin instead of the content of their souls?" Bob asked gently. Patterson's voice became more aggressive. "Because the Bible teaches racial separation. God made the races different for a reason." Bob's response surprised everyone, including Marcus. "Mr. Patterson, I've studied the Bible extensively. Can you tell me where Jesus Christ taught racial hatred? He didn't teach hatred, Patterson said quickly. But he didn't teach race mixing either. Actually, Bob said, Jesus' own genealogy includes people of different races, and his first followers included Jews, Romans, Ethiopians, and people from many nations. The Apostle Philip baptized the Ethiopian eunuch. Jesus himself said that in God's house there are many rooms, not separate rooms for separate races. Patterson was clearly struggling now. As Grand Wizard, he was supposed to be the authority on racial ideology, but Bob's biblical knowledge was far deeper than his own. "You're twisting the scriptures," Patterson said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Mr. Patterson," Bob continued, his voice remaining gentle and patient, "can you tell me about your children? Do you have children?" The question seemed to catch Patterson off guard. "I have 2 daughters," he said quietly. "How old are they?" 8 and 10. "And you love them?" "Of course I love them. They're my everything." Bob's voice grew even softer. "If one of your daughters came home from school and told you she had made friends with a little black girl, what would you do?" Patterson was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I'd have to explain to her why that friendship couldn't continue." "And how would you explain that, Mr. Patterson? How would you tell an innocent child that she can't be friends with another innocent child because of skin, color?" Because that's how I was raised," Patterson said, and for the first time his voice cracked with uncertainty. "And how were your daughters supposed to understand that? Children don't see color the way adults do. They see friends, playmates, people to laugh and share with. Hatred has to be taught to them. Is that really what you want to teach your little girls?" The radio audience could hear Patterson breathing heavily. Marcus watched Bob in amazement as the Jamaican musician continued to calmly dismantle decades of indoctrinated racism with simple questions and gentle logic. "Mr. Patterson," Bob said, "can you tell me what you're most afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything," Patterson replied automatically. "I think you are," Bob said kindly. "I think you're afraid that if people of different races come together, you'll discover that we're more alike than different. You're afraid that everything you've been taught about racial superiority is wrong, and being wrong about something you've built your whole identity around. That's terrifying." Patterson was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. Radio silence was almost unheard of in live broadcasting, but Marcus didn't dare interrupt what was clearly a profound moment. "What if you are alike?" Patterson finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if everything I've been taught is wrong? Then I've wasted my whole life hating people for no reason." "It's never too late to change," Bob said gently. "Love is always stronger than hate. But it takes courage to choose love when you've been choosing hate for so long. But my organization, my family, my whole community expects me to lead them in this fight. What if instead of leading them in a fight, you led them toward understanding? What if the Grand Wizard of the KKK became the first person to say, 'We were wrong, and we're going to do better'?" Patterson was crying now, though he tried to hide it. "You don't understand. I can't just walk away from this. I have responsibilities." "Your greatest responsibility," Bob said, "is to your daughters. What kind of world do you want to leave them? One filled with the hatred that you inherited, or one where they can judge people by their character instead of their color?" The emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming not just Patterson, but thousands of radio listeners who were witnessing this real-time transformation of one of America's most prominent racists. "I don't know how to change," Patterson admitted through his tears. "I've been this way for so long." "Change starts with a choice," Bob said. "Just one choice. Right now, on this radio show, you can choose to let go of the hate you've been carrying. You can choose to be the father your daughters deserve." Patterson was quiet for another long moment. Then, incredibly, listeners heard the sound of movement, as if Patterson was getting up from his phone. "Mr. Patterson, are you still there?" Marcus asked. "I'm here," Patterson said, his voice stronger now. I'm going to do something I never thought I'd do." The next sounds over the radio were shocking. Patterson could be heard moving around, then the distinct sound of fabric rustling and something being torn. "I'm taking off my hood," Patterson said into the phone. "I'm taking off these robes that represent everything ugly about what I've believed." Radio listeners heard the striking of a match, then the crackle of flames. "I'm burning it," Patterson said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm burning this symbol of hatred. Mr. Marley, I don't know if you can forgive me for all the hurt I've caused, but I'm done with hate. I'm done with the Klan. I want to be better for my daughters." Bob's voice was thick with emotion as he responded. "Brother Patterson, there's nothing to forgive. You just chose love over hate, and that choice heals everything. Your daughters are going to be so proud of their father." The radio audience erupted. WQED's phone lines were jammed with callers wanting to respond to what they had just witnessed. News outlets across the country picked up the story within hours. But the most remarkable part of the story was what happened next. True to his word, John Patterson resigned from the KKK the next day. He held a press conference in Birmingham, Alabama, where he publicly renounced racism and announced that he would dedicate his life to fighting the hatred he had once promoted. "Yesterday, a Jamaican musician taught me more about Christianity and love than I had learned in my entire life," Patterson told the assembled reporters. "Bob Marley showed me that my hatred was destroying not just other people, but my own soul. I want my daughters to grow up in a world where they can love anyone, regardless of color." Patterson faced enormous backlash from his former organization and his community. He received death threats, lost his job, and was ostracized by people who had once supported him. But he never wavered in his commitment to change. Bob, meanwhile, invited Patterson and his family to attend his Pittsburgh concert the following week. The image of the former KKK Grand Wizard sitting in the front row with his two young daughters, watching Bob perform songs about unity and love, made headlines around the world. After the concert, Patterson approached Bob backstage with his daughters in tow. "Mr. Marley," Patterson said, "I want my girls to meet the man who changed their father's heart." Bob knelt down to the girls' level. "Your daddy is a very brave man," he told them. "It takes more courage to admit you're wrong and change than it does to keep being wrong." The older daughter, 10-year-old Sarah, looked at Bob seriously. "My daddy says you taught him that love is stronger than hate. Is that true?" Bob smiled. "What do you think?" Sarah looked at her father, who was standing with his hand on her shoulder, tears in his eyes as he watched his daughter talk to the man who had saved his soul. "I think it must be true," Sarah said, "because my daddy is different now. He smiles more. He's happier." Patterson's transformation became a national story. He began speaking at churches, schools, and community centers about the dangers of hatred and the possibility of redemption. He wrote a book about his experience called From Wizard to Warrior: How Bob Marley Saved My Soul. The radio interview was replayed countless times and eventually became one of the most famous moments in broadcasting history. It was studied in communications classes, psychology courses, and conflict resolution programs as an example of how to respond to hatred with love. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on Patterson's daughters. Sarah and her younger sister Mary grew up to become civil rights lawyers, dedicating their careers to fighting the kind of discrimination their father had once promoted. "My father's transformation taught me that no one is beyond redemption," Sarah said in a 2018 interview marking the 40th anniversary of the radio show. "Bob Marley showed us that love really can change hearts, even hearts that seem completely closed to love." When Bob Marley died in 1981, John Patterson was one of the speakers at a memorial service in Birmingham. Standing before a mixed-race crowd that included many of the people he had once hated, Patterson delivered a eulogy that brought the entire congregation to tears. Bob Marley saved my life, Patterson said. Not by preaching to me, not by condemning me, but by loving me when I didn't deserve love. He saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. The possibility for change, for growth, for redemption. Patterson paused, looking out at the diverse crowd that had gathered to honor Bob's memory. Bob taught me that hatred is not natural, it's learned. But love is natural. Love is what we're born with. Hatred covers it up, but love is always there underneath, waiting to be rediscovered. That's Bob's greatest gift to the world, not just his music, but his proof that love really is stronger than hate. The radio station WQED still plays the interview every year on November 15th, the anniversary of the broadcast. The station receives hundreds of calls from listeners sharing their own stories of transformation, forgiveness, and redemption. John Patterson died in 2015